The current conflict unfolding on the European continent represents far more than a territorial dispute. It is the definitive operational assessment of whether NATO doctrine remains relevant in the 21st century. I tell you bluntly, it does not. The narrative emanating from Washington and Brussels, a toxic blend of political idealism and wishful thinking, is fundamentally at war with simple physics and military mathematics. The war is not being fought on political terms, it is being decided by attrition, industrial capacity, and strategic competence. And on every one of those military metrics, the party is over for the Western supported alliance. We are watching the tragic, entirely foreseeable collapse of a client state's military capacity, engineered by a generation of Western political and military leadership who are fighting a war they conceptualized in the 1,980 seconds, entirely ignorant of the operational reality of the drone age. This is not a failure of courage on the part of the soldiers being sent into the grinder. It is a catastrophic failure of doctrine and leadership. The sheer scale of the human cost incurred by the forces we support is now approaching a level that transcends mere military defeat. It constitutes a demographic catastrophe. When I examine the raw data and I ignore the propaganda filtering through the compromised intelligence agencies and the Western media, the figures paint a grim, unavoidable picture. We are looking at sustained daily casualty rates, killed and seriously wounded, that are simply not replaceable. The mathematics of attrition are relentless. You cannot lose personnel at this rate and maintain unit cohesion, especially when your adversary is systematically integrating advanced technologies and unified command structures. The current effective combat strength of the forces we are supporting is dramatically lower than the official numbers admit. We are seeing battalions operating at company strength, and in some cases, company-sized formations operating with a handful of personnel holding a kilometer-long front. This is not a defensive line. This is a sieve waiting to collapse. The continuous commitment of inadequately trained conscripts, men pulled off the streets with days of basic instruction, is a futile gesture by a political elite that views its own people as expendable cannon fodder. They are sacrificing their youth not for a strategic victory, but for a narrative victory in the eyes of their Western paymasters. This is the definition of political incompetence overriding basic military logic. Military history teaches us that when a position becomes untenable, the prudent commander conducts an orderly retreat to a more defensible line. The priority is preserving the force. Instead, we see commands insisting on holding positions until the last possible moment, converting potential tactical withdrawals into total operational traps. The current situation unfolding across multiple sectors, the gradual, systematic encirclement operations, the methodical closing of all viable retreat corridors, is not random. It is calculated strategic containment. The adversary understands that allowing a cohesive, large fighting force to escape and reorganize along a new line creates an ongoing, persistent threat. By trapping them in place, by denying them the golden bridge of organized retreat, they maximize the enemy's losses, eliminate the need for costly urban warfare, and destroy the enemy's combat capacity in the most efficient manner possible. This is the ruthless logic of attrition being executed by a competent general staff. They are conserving their own forces while systematically eliminating the enemy's irreplaceable personnel. The ultimate goal is not necessarily immediate territorial acquisition, though that is a consequence. The goal is force degradation. Once the enemy loses the operational capacity to field a cohesive fighting force, everything else follows quickly. The critical point for the Western establishment to understand is that the manpower crisis is absolute. When a nation has seen the mass departure of its working age population, combined with catastrophic battlefield losses, You reach a point where no amount of sophisticated Western weaponry, no Leopard tank or Patriot missile, can compensate for the lack of soldiers to operate and support them. Weapon systems require operators, logistics, and continuous maintenance. You cannot recruit your way out of a demographic collapse. The political leadership in Washington and London seems utterly incapable of confronting this reality, instead, choosing to fund the conflict indefinitely, ensuring that the remaining young men are sacrificed to prolong a war that is mathematically lost. This is not support, it is negligent prolonging of human suffering. The operational environment itself has evolved past Western doctrine. The pervasive integration of advanced drone technology for reconnaissance, precision targeting, and direct engagement means the battlefield is now completely transparent. There is no security in maneuver. There is only security in dispersion, concealment, and overwhelming targeted firepower. The Western military leadership, educated in a post Cold War world focused on counterinsurgency and projecting force dominance against weak, non peer adversaries, is structurally unprepared for this environment. They were taught the maneuver warfare doctrine, focusing on rapid flanking movements and exploiting the enemy's command weaknesses. The problem is that doctrine fails catastrophically when the enemy can see your maneuver from miles away via a drone and incinerate your formation with precision artillery before you arrive at the tactical objective. We continue to provide operational guidance based on this flawed maneuver doctrine, sending troops into prepared kill zones against an enemy who is executing the only doctrine that works in the drone age: firepower-based attrition. This operational disconnect is the most profound failure of Western military leadership. The failure we are observing is not merely one of tactical execution, it is a doctrinal collapse rooted in the institutional inability of the Western military establishment to understand how technology fundamentally alters the operational environment. We are seeing a clash between two incompatible philosophies of war, and the side clinging to outdated dogma is losing catastrophically. The entire Western training paradigm, particularly since the collapse of the Soviet Union, has centered on maneuver warfare. This doctrine, brilliant in theory and often effective against low-tech irregular forces, aims to achieve victory by dislocating the enemy's command structure and placing forces at tactical advantage through speed and depth. The operational concept relies on the enemy being blind to your movements, allowing deep thrusts and flank attacks to decide the battle before the enemy can react. The problem is that the drone age has eliminated battlefield opacity. When persistent surveillance from commercial satellites to inexpensive FPV drones means that every maneuver, every concentration of armor, and every logistical column is instantly observed, the entire premise of maneuver warfare collapses. You cannot execute a deep, rapid flanking maneuver when your adversary sees the move before the vehicles are out of the staging area and can destroy them with guided munitions or massed artillery before they reach the penetration point. The adversary, Russia, recognized this reality and chose a different path. Rather than attempting a complex, high-risk maneuver campaign, which they historically struggle with, they doubled down on the doctrine that has worked for them for centuries: firepower-based attrition. This approach rejects the reliance on superior generalship or complex rapid movement. Instead, it relies on three immutable factors: overwhelming concentration of fire, defense in depth, and industrial capacity. This is not a new concept. If you look at the historical precedent, Russian forces, going back to the Napoleonic Wars and certainly throughout the Eastern Front of World War II, understood that against a technologically superior or organizationally unified opponent, their advantage lay in the ability to absorb casualties while systematically grinding the enemy down with superior weight of fire. They recognized their limits and adapted. Their current doctrine utilizes the drone age not for maneuver, but for unparalleled targeting accuracy. The drone identifies the target, and integrated artillery, glide bombs, and rocket systems deliver overwhelming destruction. This creates an integrated kill chain of unprecedented efficiency, maximizing casualties while minimizing their own exposure. This is why the Ukrainian counteroffensive of 2023 was a foregone conclusion. It was a Western designed maneuver operation attempting rapid penetration against a dispersed, deeply defended, and sensor rich enemy. It was a mass sacrifice of men and equipment, guaranteed to fail by the laws of military physics. The advice our Western generals provided was suicidal because it was based on an outdated, fundamentally incorrect reading of the contemporary battlefield. We only need to look at our own history to see the tragic irony. The United States military, despite its academic obsession with maneuver doctrine, has always been, in practice, a firepower-based army. Look at the Normandy campaign in World War II. We did not win by outmaneuvering the Wehrmacht. We won by overwhelming them with industrial output, complete air superiority, and massive sustained artillery bombardment. We pulverized the enemy positions until they withdrew. Russia is now executing this American historical playbook with modern technology and superior industrial organization. And the reason we cannot recognize this successful doctrine is because our institutional mind is structurally incapable of processing facts that contradict the established political narrative of our own superiority. This leads directly to the core of the institutional failure within the Pentagon and NATO. The root cause of this doctrinal collapse is not a lack of funding. We spend exponentially more than our adversaries. It is a catastrophic failure in leadership selection and military education. For decades, the promotion system in the American Armed Forces has favored political maneuvering, staff work, speech writing, and connection to senior commanders over demonstrated operational competence and technical understanding. Our senior military colleges churn out officers with advanced degrees in social sciences, law, and liberal arts, while officers with deep, hands-on technical backgrounds in physics, engineering, and advanced logistics are often sidelined for being too blunt or too focused on verifiable facts. The result is a general staff that simply cannot comprehend the technical implications of the war they are directing. They do not understand the underlying mathematics of hypersonic speed, the complexities of integrated electronic warfare, or the scale required for modern industrial mobilization. They make decisions based on political wish casting and optimistic, unverified intelligence reports from client states, rather than on the uncompromising calculus of mass, velocity, and entropy. This contrasts sharply with the adversary structure, where leadership, particularly within the general staff, is selected through rigorous evaluation processes designed explicitly to identify individuals with the judgment, courage, and technical understanding necessary to command large-scale combined arms operations. When the American military lacks an integrated general staff with true operational control, instead maintaining separate commands that attempt coordination without clear authority, we create a structural disadvantage that is insurmountable. When confronting an opponent whose entire command structure centers on integrated, unified control, we are trying to fight a peer conflict with a command architecture designed to fight disconnected counterinsurgency campaigns, and the result is the predictable, grinding defeat of our client forces. The incompetence is systematic. When the National Training Center exercises revealed that a frontal attack against a prepared modern defense, even with air support, is suicidal, the institutional response is often to ignore the lesson, not to reform the doctrine. When the Pentagon promotes officers because they represent specific demographic categories or political viewpoints rather than demonstrated combat competence, we are ensuring that the structural rot continues. This institutional disease is what enables the political leadership to continue sacrificing lives under a failed doctrine. They are surrounded by yes men, staff officers whose careers depend on validating the flawed assumptions of the past. The tragic cost is borne by the young men being conscripted and thrown into the meat grinder casualties in a war that our own leadership does not technically understand how to win. The failure of the doctrine is merely a symptom of the deeper institutional corruption that prizes political conformity over military reality. Ji main part uch shuru kar rahahun. The institutional rot that guarantees doctrinal failure inevitably leads to financial and technological corruption. The greatest threat to Western security is not foreign aggression. It is the military-industrial complex, a self-licking ice cream cone designed to maximize profit for corporations and advance the careers of senior military and political officials, entirely independent of battlefield reality. This system is structured to avoid accountability and prioritize financial considerations over military effectiveness. Our armed forces are equipped not with what works, but with what guarantees the highest profit margins for defense contractors. This is the core of the systemic failure we see. When you have a procurement system dominated by cost-plus contracts, the financial incentive is simple: maximize cost, maximize profit. There is absolutely no incentive to innovate, streamline production, or build a system that is simple, durable, and effective. The system rewards complexity, delays, and endless upgrade cycles. This is why, when we look at the reality of sustained peer conflict, the West is paralyzed. We cannot produce the basic instruments of war, artillery shells, basic armor, and replacement platforms at the rate required. We were told our technological sophistication would compensate for numerical disadvantages, but our technological advantage is largely illusory, built on decades of political guarantees, not battlefield performance. We funnel billions into multi-decade projects that deliver platforms that are too complicated to maintain, too expensive to risk, and often fail to perform their core functions. Take the Patriot air defense system, for example. This is a system deployed across Eastern Europe, touted as the pinnacle of Western anti-missile defense. Yet, in real-world combat scenarios, its effectiveness against modern strike packages is negligible, generously estimated at less than 6% success against certain sophisticated threats. It is a multi-billion-dollar program that demonstrably fails to protect what it is designed to protect. But does the Pentagon stop buying it? No. Do our political leaders stop promoting it? No. Because the system is designed to reward the process, not the outcome. The system operates on the principle that the threat of a failing system is more profitable than the reality of a working one. The enemy, meanwhile, operates under the absolute opposite set of constraints. They prioritize engineering reality over profit maximization. Their systems, often simpler, more durable, and produced at an exponential rate, are designed to perform a singular, violent function effectively. This leads directly to the massive technological gap that is being systematically exposed in this conflict. While the West has struggled to produce even one single modern main battle tank chassis annually, Russia is maintaining and in some areas increasing its production of armored vehicles and artillery ammunition, demonstrating a superior industrial mobilization capacity. This is not an accident. This reflects a strategic prioritization of national industrial security over Wall Street profit quarterly reports. But the most alarming divergence lies in strategic weaponry. We continue to rely on defense systems like the Patriot, designed to counter threats from the 1,990 seconds, while our adversary has deployed systems we cannot track, intercept, or even fully understand. The Kinzhal hypersonic missile, the very system the British and Ukrainian intelligence services were desperately trying to acquire through bribery, represents a decisive strategic advantage. Its combination of speed and maneuverability means it defeats every layered air defense architecture currently deployed by NATO. This is a technical reality that renders vast swathes of our defense spending obsolete. Furthermore, we must examine the nuclear propulsion technology exemplified by the Burevestnik cruise missile. This is a revolutionary platform capable of virtually unlimited range, powered by a miniaturized internal nuclear reactor. This is a technical achievement that places Russian engineering considerably ahead of Western capabilities in this crucial domain. The West abandoned such programs decades ago, declaring the problems like radiation containment unsolvable. The adversary solved them. The development of these systems, hypersonics, long range nuclear propulsion, and advanced electronic warfare, is not merely about making a better missile. It is about fundamentally altering the strategic deterrence equation. They are creating systems that challenge the long held assumption that the American mainland is invulnerable to sustained, sophisticated attack. Our response has been silence, denial, and doubling down on failing platforms, which only guarantees the widening of this technological gap. This institutional corruption ensures that the failure of doctrine leads directly to the death of the soldier. The generals and the political leaders, disconnected from the battlefield and insulated by layers of bureaucracy, continue to push a flawed doctrine that consumes men and material because the financial incentive requires perpetual conflict, not swift victory. The failure to produce basic artillery shells at a 4-to-1 ratio to our adversary, the failure to produce basic armor, and the continued reliance on high-cost, underperforming projects like the Patriot system are not isolated mistakes. They are the unavoidable symptoms of a structurally corrupt system that prioritizes profit for the few over the safety and strategic effectiveness of the many. Until this financial and institutional rot is purged from the Western military apparatus, we will continue to lose the war of attrition, not just on the battlefield, but in the technological race that determines the long-term balance of global power. The current conflict is simply making visible the extent of this systemic decay. Demanding a level of accountability the establishment is utterly unwilling to provide. The failure of conventional doctrine and the institutional rot of the military-industrial complex lead us directly to the highest strategic risk, the breakdown of the established nuclear red lines. When a conflict is lost conventionally, the political temptation to escalate through other means becomes overwhelming. Our leaders, with their lack of technical background, operate under the delusion that they can manage this escalation, that they can differentiate between conventional and strategic responses in the heat of a crisis. They are wrong. The crucial piece of strategic context that is deliberately ignored in Washington is the history of the anti-ballistic missile ABM Treaty. In 2002, the United States unilaterally withdrew from this treaty. This was not a minor diplomatic adjustment. It was an act of profound strategic destabilization. The ABM Treaty was a central pillar of nuclear stability because it codified mutual assured destruction MAD. It essentially stated, "We will not defend our population from your second strike, and you will not defend yours from ours." This terrible but stable equilibrium ensured that neither side could ever launch a first strike, knowing that total annihilation was guaranteed in response. By withdrawing from the ABM Treaty, the U.S. signaled an intention to build a shield and render the opponent's nuclear deterrent obsolete. For Russia, this was an existential betrayal. Their general staff understood immediately that their entire strategic framework was undermined. If the US could build an effective missile shield, it would give Washington the theoretical ability to strike first and then intercept the decimated, ragged response, thus eliminating MAD and making a nuclear first strike thinkable. Their response, which was entirely logical and predictable from a strategic standpoint, was to invest decades and immense resources into developing new, unconventional strategic systems specifically designed to defeat any missile shield. This is the genesis of the technologies I mentioned earlier: the Poseidon nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed torpedo, and the Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile. These systems are specifically designed to bypass, overwhelm, or circumvent established missile defense architectures, restoring the element of assured destruction and, critically, restoring deterrence. The irony is that the United States spent billions to destroy a treaty that guaranteed its security, forcing its primary adversary to spend billions on next-generation systems that guarantee its destruction. This is strategic incompetence on an unimaginable scale. Now we face the immediate red line issue concerning the deployment of conventional weapons that possess an unambiguous dual-use capability. The most urgent threat today centers on systems like the Tomahawk Land Attack Missile, TLA. The Tomahawk, while primarily conventional, has a history as a nuclear delivery system. In the current strategic environment, where minutes are the difference between survival and annihilation, the adversary's air defense and early warning systems cannot afford the luxury of waiting to see whether an incoming cruise missile is armed with a conventional warhead or a strategic nuclear one. They must assume the worst-case scenario, that the incoming missile is nuclear. This principle, the inability to differentiate, creates an unmanageable level of risk. When the political leadership in the West discusses providing weapons that can strike deep into the adversary's territory, they are talking about Tomahawk-capable platforms or similar long-range precision weapons. The moment one of these missiles is fired, the adversary is presented with a binary choice: wait and risk annihilation, or preemptively strike and risk total war. Any rational general staff will choose the latter. The deployment of these deep strike conventional systems is not merely an escalation, it is the deliberate compression of the adversary's decision-making timeline to zero. It forces the adversary into a hair-trigger posture where any perceived threat immediately translates into the highest level of response. Political leaders who talk casually about these strikes have no concept of the nuclear tripwires they are playing with. Their lack of technical military knowledge means they don't understand the difference between a skirmish and a strategic countdown. The continued failure on the conventional battlefield guarantees that the political pressure for these escalatory actions will increase. When the narrative of conventional victory collapses, and it has collapsed, the political class must find a new narrative to justify the blood and treasure spent. That narrative often involves a game-changing weapon, a technological silver bullet, or a direct strike that demonstrates resolve. Every single option now being discussed involves weapons that push the conflict closer to the strategic red line. The deployment of U.S. systems in Europe capable of launching these missiles is seen by the adversary not as a defensive shield, but as the forward deployment of a first strike capability, designed to launch conventional attacks on strategic targets with the added ambiguity that they might be nuclear. This ambiguity is the definition of uncontrolled escalation. The political rhetoric continues to paint the adversary as irrational or as bluffing, but their strategic doctrine is entirely rational: deterrence through the absolute certainty of an effective, devastating second strike. By attempting to eliminate that certainty through ABM withdrawal and by deploying dual use systems, the West is systematically dismantling the architecture of global security, guaranteeing that the next crisis will be the final one. The greatest danger is not the adversary's intent, but the West's own profound strategic ignorance and political arrogance. The logical consequence of systemic military failure and profound strategic ignorance is predictable political collapse. The political class believes it can manage the narrative indefinitely, funding a lost war with someone else's blood and treasure. They are wrong. They are running a political system that is entirely untethered from the fiscal and logistical realities of modern war, and the math is about to catch up to them, not just on the battlefield, but in their own capitals. We are already seeing the precursors to this collapse across Europe. The continuous flow of military and financial aid is fundamentally unsustainable. European political leaders Macron, Starmer, and the leadership in Berlin are betting their entire political future on the hope that the conflict will yield some miracle. They demand sacrifice from their populations for an increasingly abstract and futile cause. But the human cost and the economic burden, the draining of national defense stockpiles, and the mortgaging of their nation's economic futures will inevitably collide with domestic political realities. When the cost of maintaining pensions and public services becomes impossible to reconcile with the cost of perpetuating a lost proxy war, the political will must fracture. We are going to see a cascading withdrawal, a political unraveling that will accelerate the military collapse. Leaders will be replaced by new governments who prioritize national interest, who are unwilling to sacrifice their own population's welfare for the sake of defending the discredited ideology of the outgoing Western foreign policy establishment. The entire NATO alliance structure is now exposed as being structurally dependent on American industrial output and strategic direction, a direction that is currently bankrupt. The alliance is gambling with marked cards and no industrial base. This conflict has functioned as a brutal, non-negotiable demonstration that political consensus does not generate artillery shells and ideological alignment does not produce hypersonic missiles. The only thing that matters is competence and capacity. This leaves the Western world with one final choice: the ultimate choice between accepting reality or clinging to denial. The path of denial is the path we are currently on, continuing to fund a war that is mathematically lost, sending obsolete equipment and inadequately trained men into the grinder, ignoring the technological gap, and risking nuclear escalation through strategic ignorance. This path guarantees not only the catastrophic loss of a client state, but the guaranteed rapid acceleration of the decline of US and European influence. It is a suicide pact dressed up in the language of freedom and democracy. The path of acceptance, the only viable strategic path, requires an immediate, painful admission of failure. It demands restraint and institutional reform. It means immediately ceasing the flow of military aid that only prolongs the suffering, acknowledging the established battlefield realities, and engaging in serious diplomatic negotiation from a position of strategic realism, not moral hubris. More importantly, it requires a complete purge of the failed, politically promoted leadership within the Pentagon and intelligence apparatus, and a commitment to restoring military competence over political correctness. We must rebuild our industrial base, reform our promotion systems to prioritize technical expertise, and reconceptualize our strategic doctrine based on the physics of the 21st century battlefield. The greatest danger to the United States is not external. It is the internal structural decay, the institutional corruption that guarantees incompetence, and the political arrogance that refuses to acknowledge the limits of American power. We have chosen to live in a world where we believed we could ignore the laws of military physics and strategic history. The battlefield is now delivering the final crushing verdict on that delusion. History does not pause for pride or political convenience. It demands accountability. The failure is not abstract. It is a profound moral necessity that the political class confront the consequences of their actions. We must demand accountability. We must demand competence. We must demand an end to this predictable strategic disaster. What institutional changes must be enforced immediately to break the cycle of incompetence and political promotion? And what is the actual strategic cost to American security if we continue to fund a conflict that is already mathematically lost? Hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth, and subscribe so you don't miss the next strategic briefing.